Welcome back to another deck profile on the second channel. Today we're taking a look at the Kingdra archetype for Diamond and Pearl Cities. Now I originally wasn't too hyped on doing a Kingdra video because my list does not differ much from Jay Hornung's video, but it has been, I suppose, like 5 years since he both uploaded that video and since I am uploading DP SF content again. I feel like you can't really talk about the format without talking about Kingdra. And there's two different ways you can play Kingdra in this format. I guess there's three different ways you can play Kingdra in this format, and I'll talk about all the different variations of those. So I'll add a little bit more context to it. But Kingdra was a Tier 1, arguably the best deck, Tier 0 maybe even back in the day, in the historical 2008 Cities format. Nowadays it's got some counterplay to it. It's a deck that's very, very strong in the opening turns, but strength eventually falls off in the late game. 4 copies of Horsea. This is your best opener because you want to start your Kingdra as often as possible. Horsea's got 2 great attacks with Smokescreen, providing you a way to potentially stop your opponent from locking you. So a common counterplay that's come up in modern 2008 Cities is that, and this is something created by James G, is that you can play Ghastly in your deck to trainer lock Kingdra, which really stops it from getting that pop-off that it wants. And while that is true, you only have one guaranteed item lock with Ghastly until Horsea can potentially stop it with Smokescreen. So very good attack to keep in mind there. And Reverse Dust doing 10 and switching is pretty cool. 2 copies of Seadra. It's the only Seadra legal, but even in 2010, this is the Seadra I quite like. Aqua Pump does 30 plus 10 for each water energy you discard from your hand. It's pretty easy to output 50 damage in this deck, and since we can get back our water energy whenever we want, it's something where if you are taking a knockout with the stack, let's just say you don't have a Kingdra turn 1, but you have a Candy Seadra, and you're facing down a Larvitar, it's worth discarding those extra water energies if it means taking that knockout early and getting the game started off to an aggressive pace. 3 energy for 50, don't use that attack. Next up, 4 copies of Kingdra, the main guy of the deck. Kingdra's there for its Dragon Pump, which says you can discard 2 cards from your hand. If you do, the attack does 40 plus 20 more damage, and 20 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. We want to pretty much always be discarding extra cards with this. It is very, very good. Doing 60 and 20 for a single energy is arguably the most powerful damage to energy ratio in the entire game up until this point. This is a huge power creep card, insanely broken, only needs a single energy, and with the old rare candy rules, you can do this on the first turn if you go second. This card is broken. Now, we don't have broken time space in this format, so while we do have very high chances of getting Kingdra turn 1, it is not guaranteed. Your chances of getting a Seadra or a Kingdra turn 1, though, are very high. The other attack on Kingdra is also pretty useful. It's a free attack that says, shuffle as search your disc pile for as many water energy as you like and shuffle them into your deck. Does 10 for each one you shuffle. We only play 7 water energy in my version of this deck that is based on Jay Hornung's list, but there's also a second version of Kingdra that plays like 13 copies of water, and that deck's goal is eventually you discard the water energy with Dragon Pump, and then at some point in the game you have a nuclear option of just doing a massive chunk of damage once you have discarded enough waters. Personally, I find those to be both less consistent and also have less counterplay. They are very straightforward. They are able to one-shot opposing Kingdras if you discard all 13 waters. However, they have less counterplay. They're not going to play that long game strategy. They're just trying to get a one-shot at some point. There's advantages to both. I think that the lower water variant is better, because that lower water variant allows us to fit a 2/2 Cresselia line. This is a tech that Jay Hornung came up with, but it's certainly one of the cards that is insanely good in this format. Cresselia says, with Full Moon Dance, you can move 1 damage counter from one Pokemon to another Pokemon in play. So this acts as both healing. You can heal your own Pokemon for 10 and put that on your opponent. This acts as a way to increase your damage, because now you have 10 more damage on your opponent's side. And if your opponent doesn't damage you, you can also take that damage that you do to their board. So let's just say you're going to overkill, and you can move that damage around to keep it in play. Cresselia is a huge piece of why this deck is still strong in this format, despite there being counterplay to it. Because, you know, if it was just, okay, once my opponent gets set up and, you know, they can start healing with their Cresselias. Kingdra's kind of out of the game, but with our own Cresselias, we can enter that Cresselia war, one which we're usually not winning necessarily unless we have 2 Cresselias online, but one in which it keeps us in the game. It keeps us so that 60 damage you're doing is actually sticking to the opponent's board. Against decks like Abomasnow, once they get their Cresselias up with Abomasnow, it can be really hard to actually damage their board. Same thing with Dusknoir. If they get their Cresselia up, it can be very hard to damage them because Dusknoir becomes immune. You don't have many things you can hit. In this case, I think 2/2 Cresselia is very good in this deck, and is also just in a fantastic mirror tech. If you're playing the Kingdra mirror and you have Cresselia and your opponent doesn't, you have a huge advantage in that mirror, since you are able to effectively heal damage off of your board and move that back to your opponent's board. It's an extra 20 damage each turn while also healing 20 damage. It's insane. This card is Monkey Dory in this format, and it is about as ubiquitous as Monkey Dory is in Standard. Great, great card. 2/2 Claydol, you could potentially argue 3/3 to increase your chances of opening Baltoy and Claydol in your hand. I think 2/2 is fine. 3/3 could work because you just have extra copies to discard, but you really only need 2 online. And frankly, once you're set up, this deck only needs 1. Instead, I choose to dedicate the extra spots in the deck to 2 copies of Uxie. Uxie is another draw Pokemon with that set of Poké Power. Both Claydol and Uxie are just the most aggressive draw cards in the format. 2 copies of Uxie works really well for this deck because a lot of times you want to go for that second copy of Uxie on the first turn when you don't have Claydol to try to get that turn 1 rare candy combo. Uxie's very good. I like 2 copies of Uxie. A lot of time your turn 1 Roseanne is going to be Roseanne for Uxie and Uxie. Try to get yourself off on a knockout. 1 copy of Chatot. Chatot's here for that free Mimic attack, getting us a new hand of however many cards in hand our opponent has, usually going to be 5 or 6 in this format. This is good just if you have a really bad opening hand. A Bebe can get you 1 Uxie, or it can get you a Chatot. Chatot's pretty good. It's also got free retreat, so it acts as a way to pivot for your warp points, which we'll talk about in a little bit. This is potentially a cuttable spot, but I like Chatot in a lot of my decks. 1 copy of Unown G protects our benched Pokemon, or just our Pokemon from effects in general. Some of the most relevant effects in this format are going to be Bronzong's Pain Amplifier, which applies extra damage to Pokemon that are already damaged. There's Gengar's Shadow Room, which is a huge one for sniping our Cresselia Level-X. And then there's Devoluter. And realistically, this deck could play 2 Unown G. Most of my decks, in fact, do. So if you want to maybe swap Chatot out for a second Unown G, have some more insurance in those matchups, that's good. However, Unown G is, of course, not very good in the opening, kind of dead. And there's some matchups where you don't need it much at all, against like Regigigas or something like that. So if you want to play extra copies and then you can just discard them, sure, be my guest. I think 1 is fine with this deck, whereas we're just trying to go aggro. 1 copy of Unown Q, that quick attaches itself to one of your Pokemon just like Unown G does, but Unown Q, instead of preventing effects of attacks, can reduce the retreat cost by 1. Very big in this deck for letting Cresselia get online for free or pivoting out a bad starter, such as Unown G, out of the active spot so that we can attack on turn 1. Very, very simple deck. We're just trying to get that aggressive Kingdra start. And sometime in the game, maybe we discard too many water energy, we can put them back in the deck. 4 copies of Roseanne. Roseanne is that great supporter. Every deck in this format runs 4. Finding your basic Pokemon and basic energy is incredible. Reminder that because we have 2 Uxies in this deck, you can find 2 Uxies on the first turn. Try to maximize your chances of getting that turn 1 Kingdra. That is a play you see pretty commonly in this deck. And then I believe we only have, yeah, I'm not wrong, only have 3 copies of Bebe. I was trying to see if there's a 4th one. There's not. 3 copies of Bebe is actually lower than most other decks in this format. Most decks run 4/4 Roseanne for Bebe, and then 2 to 3 copies of another auxiliary supporter. This deck is running only 7 supporter cards. That is because it is just built to be aggressive. Now you can consider Cynthia's Feelings in here. You could consider maybe, I don't know, like a Felicity's Drawing in here. I don't think you particularly need them. This deck just wants to go all out aggro. So we have lots of item cards. Bebe's great though. Finds our Claydol, finds our Uxie, finds our Kingdra, finds our Cresselia. Good card. 4 copies of Pokédex. Pokédex looks at the top 2 cards of your deck and keeps one of them, and then the other goes to the bottom of the deck. Kingdra's trying to pilfer through that deck, so we have Lots of quote-unquote thinner cards that are there to help us get that turn 1 knockout and continue chaining rare candy combos. Then we have 4 copies of Poké Drawer Plus. This is the only deck where I play Poké Drawer Plus in this format that I've built. Poké Drawer Plus says you may play 2 at once. If you play 1, you get to just draw a card, but if you play 2 of these, you get to search your deck for any 2 cards. This works fantastic in this deck because that's Candy Kingdra. If you start 2 of these in your opening hand, or if you're able to Uxie or Pokédex into 2 copies of drawers, then you just get to search Candy Kingdra. It is insanely good. Maybe if you already have the candy in your hand, you can get Kingdra Warp Point. Just insanely good. Kingdra is not nearly as consistent without playing these 2 cards in the deck. They are really what makes it function. 4 copies of Rare Candy. Get to show off those Fushigi no Ame copies that I have in Japanese there. 3 copies of the Japanese one from my Japanese Gengar deck, where I think I put the alternate art ones in, so I had to reuse them somewhere. Remember, Rare Candy back then can be used on your first turn. If you go second, player going second can play any kind of trainer card they want, so you can turn 1 candy out your Kingdra and attack. That is why it is so good. You absolutely want maxed out copies of candy to hit that consistently. Candy's also very good here for getting out stage 1s. Again, like I said, you can Rare Candy into Seadra, because Rare Candy back then allowed you to candy out of stage 1, which is really strong. You can candy a Claydol out for an instant draw engine. Again, candy Seadra for turn 1, like 50 with its first attack. Lots of things you want for candy. 4 copies of PlusPower. PlusPower, very, very good card. Just increases your damage by 10. That's to get over the hump. Eventually, Kingdra will very easily knock out little guys. In the early game, you know, you're going to kill basically every single little evolving Pokemon like Larvitars and Magnemites and stuff like that in the early game. Later on, we're going to be two-shotting a lot of things, and sometimes we even need the help of PlusPower to get there against bigger guys like Tyranitar, which can be very problematic, especially against Regigigas, where we do not have access to our Poké Powers in Cresselia. We are going to need PlusPowers to make it a two-shot. So, PlusPower very good. If you want to potentially play Pokéblower Plus in the deck, this is where that slot would go. Pokéblower Plus is a Gust card that can also act as a damage boosting effect. I don't think we need Gust in this deck because we have so much bench spread, because we have Cresselia. This deck really doesn't feel like it needs Gust. I attack what I want to attack when I want to attack it. In some form, sometimes you get completely walled out. 3 copies of Warp Point. Speaking of dealing with walls, there's some annoying cards like Dusknoir and Mr. Mime that can't be hit by Pokemon with 3 or less energy attached. Warp Point is great at getting around those. Warp Point's also just great at kind of destabilizing your opponent's board. If they are reliant on, you attacking into something and maybe saving one of their evolving Pokemon on the bench, like a Baltoy, and then you Warp Point and that Baltoy is forced to come up, then you're in a really good spot. Really good aggressive playmaker, as well as getting around some of the common checks to Kingdra. 2 copies of Luxury Ball. Luxury Ball is one of those cards where sometimes you can see it even go up to 3 copies in Kingdra decks. Luxury Ball says search your deck for any Pokemon, excluding Pokemon level X, and put it into your hand. This is obviously very good for helping us get that turn 1 Kingdra. It's also very good for helping find our Pokemon like Claydol or a basic Cresselia or a Uxie. And one of the things with this deck is that we don't really care about having extra copies. Usually decks don't want to play multiple Luxury Ball because multiple Luxury Ball get no value. After that first turn, Luxury Ball, or after that first Luxury Ball, you can't play another one. But Kingdra can just discard it with its Dragon Pump attack, meaning the extra copies don't really feel bad. They're a consistency booster, and you can just discard the extras. So you hit it more often and just discard it when you don't need it. I don't think you need 3 copies. I think 2 is fine. I think it makes sense to run 2. That way you consistently find it early in the game. But running any more than that, and you're going to start to break your consistency just a little bit. Because remember, you can't play this down if you already have one down. So let's just say I had 4 Luxury Ball in the deck, and I open up 3 of them in my hand. I can't thin the other 2 cards out of my hand to draw more with Claydol or Uxie. We're just going to put these here. 2 copies of Night Maintenance. Night Maintenance shuffles 3 in any combination of Pokemon and basic energy cards back into the deck. This is a slot where, because we don't need to recover energy, you could potentially run Time-Space Distortion, which just flips 3 coins for each head to get a Pokemon back. I like being able to shuffle full Pokemon lines into the deck we can just go find them immediately with Roseanne or Bebe. Our deck is going to get thinned out in the middle to late game because of Dragon Pump discarding our excess. So I really don't find it annoying that we have to put them back into the deck. We'll find them when we want them. And just getting guaranteed 3 cards back is very important to the functioning of this deck in the long term. And lastly, we have 7 copies of Water. Again, you can run a high Water variant, but you have to cut down a lot of consistency to fit those Waters. Where are you going to fit the extra supporter card, or the supporter cards that we're already cutting down on, and then also fit extra Waters? You're going to obviously cut Cresselia for 4 more. Then you have to start to look at these trainer counts, which is tough. So I think 7 Waters is fine. We're going to find our Water when we want it, thanks to Roseanne, and we're going to get that turn 1 knockout when we want it. Now, one of the other things you can do with this deck that I have theorized in the past is that you can run a devolution strategy. Not with Technical Machine TS2 Devoluter, like most other decks do in this format, but you can play Omastar. Omastar evolves from a fossil, and it says that when you evolve into Omastar, you can devolve all of your opponent's highest stage Pokemon and put it back into their hand. That is obviously very, very strong of an effect. It devolves their whole board, and then it's also really good because you are going to take advantage of that spread damage without having to take a turn off to devolve with an attack, because that is a Poké Power. Now, usually Omastar would be very, very hard to find, but because this deck has Poké Drawer Plus and we're thinning our deck, it's not impossible to find that Omastar, so something to consider is maybe a 1/1 tech in your deck, especially for the mirror match, especially for Tyranitar. These bigger guys really do not like getting devoed. There's some decks where that will not do like anything against it, and in those matchups, just discard the Omastar pieces with Dragon Pump. Anyway, those have been my thoughts on Kingdra for the Diamond and Pearl Cities format. My voice started getting a bit scratchy. I need a drink. Not much to say about this deck. It is a pretty straightforward but extremely dangerous deck that a lot of times just takes games on turn 1 with Donk if your opponent only starts 1 Pokemon. So keep that in mind when you're playing this format. It is a flawed format to some extent. Part of that's because of Kingdra Donks, but it's not unbeatable. I think we have metagamed this format to a point where there are plenty of decks that can deal with Kingdra. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.